Well, another Monday is here, and I just wanted to present this little thing to you guys about fuses and fuse boxes, and with a story or two thrown in there. And anybody and everybody that does any kind of electrical work on a vehicle, I don't know about you guys, but the first time that I'm approaching an electrical problem after I've verified what it is that's wrong, one of the first places I like to go in the service information is to the fuse panel details. The fuse panel details being really important because that's a good place to start. If you try to go in there, and the crazy thing about it is some of these, you kind of like having a neat little, well, GM is really good about it. They'll give you a nice little map of where every fuse and relay is in that thing, that can be swapped out. And they have them labeled really nice. Now some of your Hondas and stuff, they just have pictures that are like little ISO pictures, I guess, that you're supposed to be able to look at the picture. They'll have a picture of a fan, or they'll have a picture of air conditioner compressor or some garbage like that. They have little pictures, and they have a little graphic of a book with an eye in the middle of it, like you're supposed to look this up. Hyundai is pretty good about giving you a really nice, concise little fuse panel map and all that. So one way or another, let's see if we can jump into this thing. Anybody that has ever seen wires burn up knows why we need fuses anyway. Of course, sometimes wires burn up regardless, but in this particular case, if you've ever had to fix one that burned up some wires, then you know why it is that you need a weak link in that chain so that you can cause it to, it will actually open the circuit if there's an overload of some kind. And people used to, back in the late 80s, some of your Bronco 2s had this little nondescript automobile with these little LEDs on it that was supposed to tell you when your lights were out in the back or whatever. And whenever you put the hook a trailer up to that, people would just scotch lock into that and hook a trailer up to it. Sometimes it would burn those wires out, and that would, because there would be wires that had resistance. They were resistor wires going back there, and it would measure the voltage drop across resistor wire to determine which light was out. A little circuit to do that. And I had to fix some of them because people would connect trailers to that without any regard. Then I told the story a while back of this Jeep Grand Cherokee. I think it was a Jeep Grand, well, it may have been an Explorer. One of those two SUVs that had a lamp outage module in the console. I think that was an Explorer. I've slept since then. But one way or another, they basically hooked this thing up behind a motorhome so that they could haul it and let the lights on the vehicle be their turn signals and their stoplights and all that. And what had happened on that is when they did that, this local truck outfitter's place wired it up. It burned up that little module that was down there next to the console, between the driver's seat and the console, and it came this close to setting that vehicle on fire. And so I had to find a way to do the same job without causing issues, and I devised a way to make that happen. And I think I talked about that in one of these other, but if I didn't, I'll tell you about it later. Let me know if you don't remember that, and I'll go back to it. But anyway, a fusible link, and there are still fusible links on some vehicles today. They were everywhere 20 years ago, but they haven't completely gone away. There are some places a fusible link will work when nothing else will. And a fusible link is a different kind of wire. It's not just copper with hypoline insulation on it. The hypoline insulation's, up to 150 degrees Celsius. It's supposed to, maintain. Of course, a lot of you guys have probably seen fusible links that burned and that, and split the insulation. But if what we would do if we suspected a fusible link had burned in two inside the insulation, you grab it and try to stretch it. If you can stretch it, the wire's burned in two in there. That's not too difficult to figure out. But what always got me was if I went to buy, if you bought a fusible link, you need to get one from the dealer that's specifically for that application. And the fusible link is always a little smaller than the circuit it's protecting. It can handle a surge better than a fuse can. But if there's a dead short, it will die before the rest of the circuit begins to blister and burn up and, you know, melt into other wires and all that kind of thing. And you've basically seen these. This one here will even tell you what the gauge is on it. There's fusible links coming off of there. They've been around for a very long time. But this right here, for heavy, see, here's a fusible link will be like this. Sometimes you'll have it going to the alternator, sometimes you won't. A lot of times nowadays they'll have like a 175 or 200 amp fuse, an actual, you know, quick blow fuse, not a quick blow, you know, it's a heavy fuse, between the charging system post on the alternator, and they like to use this here for a junction. Now occasionally General Motors would put a little junction block somewhere where it would basically have a post sticking out there that was isolated from the frame where it was hooked up, and they would run wires together there and give them that. Remember that story I told, I think it was last week or maybe the week before, about these people that hooked this wire, that's a fusible link there, but they hooked the charging system wire, which was set up like this, up to that post instead of this one, and the alternator wouldn't put out. So this is what a fusible link looks like that I actually cut off of an old car. This is a 12 gauge. You might notice this gauge is a little smaller than that one, if you can see that. But what I want to talk about here for a second is how this wire right here is a different material than just plain old copper. And sometimes if you go to the parts store and you say, I want fusible link wire, they'll sell you a roll of copper wire with high-pylon insulation on it. And I've never really liked that, because whenever I replace a regular fuse link, you know, I fix whatever burned out the fuse link or whatever, sometimes it just gets tired or has a surge that's too much for it. One way or another, I have used some of that copper wire that had high-pylon insulation that's rubbery feeling, it's not like regular wire. And I've put that on there, and it seems to me like even though I use the right size wire and everything, whenever that thing is in a working situation, it gets really, really hot. And I've never really liked that. This fusible link wire, this silver colored wire here, and I never have really researched to see what kind of wire that was, but I do know that when I was at the Ford dealer, if I wanted an actual fuse link of a particular gauge, they had them in there that they could sell me, that they were, I mean, you know, they'd charge them out on the ticket, but they would cost a lot of money. They were like $12 or $13 for one little fuse link like you see here, like that one, you know, right there. So anyway, just keep that in mind when you're looking at fuse link. Like I say, you're not, you know, sometimes people will grouse and grumble when I'm talking about on here, well, you're talking about cars that are too old. Well, these stuff are still around. Furthermore, I can drive by, if you were sitting in the vehicle with me, I can drive by several stores, I mean not stores but shops in this area over here where they're working on cars every day, and they got their whole parking lot full of cars, and at least I'd say 1 out of 4 cars in these places will be cars that are more than 25 years old. And there's a lot of those cars still running around out there. And so, you know, this business about, you know, we don't need to know about anything that's old. This is basically a channel for anybody that's interested in cars. Some of the DIY people. Some people get caught up because they don't like the way I look or something. Which I'm not easily offended, but at the same time, you know, if you put some kind of a comment about how you don't like the way I look or the way my glasses look on my face or something like that, I'm probably going to delete your comment. But anyhow, so this is what fuse panels look like when I first started chasing sparks on American cars. This fuse panel is under the dash of a 73 Impala. And these cars were running around everywhere when I was in high school. All right, so notice how they had them. They actually have them very beautifully labeled here, so you can tell what they are. On some of the Ford vans, they held on to this kind of fuse for a very long time, a lot longer than you would have thought they did, way up into the late 80s on some of the Ford vans. And we had some issues with the fan pulling enough current to heat up. You know, because of the nature of this connection, they would heat the fuse up and just melt the solder out of the end of the fuse. And on those, what we would have to do was cut the wires that were going into and out of the box and put a little self-resetting circuit breaker on there. But and occasionally on a vehicle, if we had one, we would have one sometimes that would come in there and it would just have a momentary short that would pop a fuse about every 4 or 5 days. and you could not duplicate it. You couldn't find it just looking around. You couldn't see anywhere where it was scratching against a sharp bracket or no screw running into it or nothing. And so we would work trying to find those. And you can't charge the customer for every, hour of time you spend chasing something like that. And so we would put a fuse in there, check it out, drive it, and couldn't get it to do it. And then 4 or 5 days later, they'd come. Maybe it's a stoplight fuse or some safety related something like that. Then you're going to have some issues, if the fuse blows and they get rear-ended or something. So what we would do is we would put a self-resetting circuit breaker of the appropriate amperage in there. And if that short was only there just for a moment, that circuit breaker would open the circuit just as long as it needed to, and then it would close the circuit right back up, and they'd never have a problem again. Here's another little factoid. Cars started having high mount stoplights in 1986. That center high mount stoplight that Chrysler and GM calls it a Chumsel, the center high mount stoplight. That thing makes you 40% less likely to be rear-ended. And if you happen to do an inspection on somebody's car and you miss that high mount stoplight, and they get, they're 40% more likely to get rear-ended if that's not working. So it's just an important thing to remember about that center high mount stoplight, because people are paying. Some of them, you might notice whenever you hit the brake, they got a little electronic circuit there where the high mount stoplight will blink 2 or 3 times before it comes on steady. It's wanting to get your attention, saying, hey, I'm stopping. That's important stuff. There's German style fuses. That's me sitting on my 58 Volkswagen whenever I was in high school. But German style fuses look different. They had this little plastic thing that was a little pointy on each end, and it would snap into these little things. And that's the way Volkswagen used those. They used it on the Volkswagen Rabbit all the way up into the 80s before they went to the other kind of fuse. This was my possum hunting bug. I talked about that a little bit on a previous video over there. And that one there was the first year that Volkswagen had that big window in the back instead of having that little oval-shaped rear window in it. And it was a European one because it had these little electromagnets that would, whenever you turned on your turn signal, they would click out like that and all that. But anyway, it was actually made to drive in Germany. But the steering wheel was on the right side of the car, which is, when I say the right side, it was on the proper side, which I would say the left side. It wasn't on the wrong side of the road. Some of these military guys will come over here and they'll have a vehicle they bought that's got a steering wheel on the passenger side. I call it that, but the driving on the wrong side of the road is what we think over here in America. This was personal trivia here. This was basically the first truck I drove. That was a 55 Chevy pickup. Now, this was my dad's pickup that he used for everything, and that's the pickup he used to use. And I would get in that thing whenever I was about 14 years old. I just drive all over the place with it. Getting caught without a driver's license back in those days wasn't a big deal. But anyway, I built this buggy right here. That's me and my brother on a buggy when I was a little older than I was here. This picture right here got caught in the background. Somebody was out there taking a picture of my sister sitting in the grass playing with a dog, and I was in the background. That's how I got that one. That was 72. In summer of 73, I drove a 63 Corvair Spider. And that was a cool little ride. It was kind of funny. One night after church, there was me and a couple of guys were going to ride around, and a whole mess of people piled in that Corvair. There was 8 of us in there, I think. There was like 3 girls and 5 guys. And 2 of us driving the car together. Imagine packing 8, full-size people into a Corvair. And we drove around and got pulled over by the cops because they thought we were going parking out there on Industrial Boulevard or something like that. That was a funny story. Back in those days, the driver's licenses in Alabama were just a postcard and they didn't have your picture on them. Anyway, summer 1974, I was driving this 65. It was a Custom. It wasn't a Galaxy. Galaxy looked like that, but Custom was a stripped down version of the Galaxy. Had a 289, 3 on the tree, got 22 miles to the gallon, no air conditioning, no power steering. And then I bought this LTD, which I had in the summer of 75. That 69 LTD, I paid $950 for it. And that was in 1974 when I bought it, but I was, probably the end of 74, beginning of 75. But I just about always had 2 or 3 cars at a time. In addition to every one of the cars you see here, I just about always had 2 or 3 little Volkswagen Bugs because Dad had a bug shop, right? Anyway, back to the lesson. In 1976, Little Fuse introduced this fast-acting fuse for General Motors. This little fuse right here didn't show up on GM cars until '80, and then when computers appeared on some of the same models about the same time these fuses did. Now, different GM models got them at different times, basically. But this was a '79 Trans Am fuse panel with the old glass top fuses. But notice the turn signal flashers in the same place. And an '80 model Trans Am fuse panel. Now, before long, everybody had fuses like this for a long time. These circuit breakers right here were okay, but they weren't as consistently self-resetting as the ones that you had, you know, the 2 different size posts on them that you mounted. But anyhow, incidentally, there will be 2 flashers. This flasher here and that flasher there. One was for the hazards and one was for the turn signals. If I had some turn signals not working, then I would find the turn signal. Usually that one would be for the hazards, and this plastic one was very carefully, how would you put that? It was very carefully calibrated so that the way that turn signals worked, if it didn't have enough current going through 2 of the bulbs, which would, you know, 2 of the bulbs, they pull about 4 amps if you got 2 bulbs. More than that if you had, you know, 2 lights in the back and 2 in the front or whatever. Anyway, they would have that thing calibrated so well that whenever you turned on the turn signal, it wouldn't flash. It would just come on. And that way you would know you had a blown bulb. Because it took a certain amount of amperage to operate that little bimetal switcher in there. This one here would work no matter what. It was one of the flashers. You could use this one down here, but that little plastic flasher was the one that was typically for your regular turn signals. Anyway, if I felt like a turn signal flasher was bad for whatever reason, and it wouldn't even flash the lights at all, I'd pull the flasher out and just put a little jumper where the flasher went, and then when you turn on your left flasher, you know, your left turn signal, it would stay on all the time. You turn the right one on, it'd stay on all the time and all that. But sometimes they put the flashers in crazy places, like one of the Fords that I worked on had the hazard flasher way over on the right side of the dash and the other one on the left side of the dash. I never understood why they'd do that. Under the hood fuse panels came later. Now, we talked about the fusible links. A lot of times you see a whole mess of fusible links here, and they'll tell you what color they were and what their amperage, you know, how many gauges there were and all that. Some later model vehicles still use a lot of fusible links. It kind of looks like that right there, you know. All right, we got some more fuses in the underhood panel. Big ones, little ones, relays with some diodes and relays and stuff on vehicles. Most everybody that's looking at this video that's worked on very many different kinds of cars at all have seen cars that will have a fuse panel or 2 fuse panels under the hood, 1 or 2 fuse panels under the dash, and maybe even a fuse panel or 2 in the trunk, usually, or under the back seats. You'll find fuse panels under the back seat. General Motors went crazy doing that. For example, on a 97 Oldsmobile 88, you would have a fuse panel under the dash on the left side, and there was another fuse panel with some relays over on the right side behind the kick panel. But they didn't have, let's see, I'm trying to remember, I don't even know if they had one under the hood or not on that car. On the Crown Victoria, there was one out there by the battery that was their main underhood fuse panel, and then they had another one under the dash. Some of your Chryslers like to stick it in the trunk back there where you'd expect to find a spare tire and all that. And some of the Buicks would have it under the back seat, and some of your other vehicle makes would too. But you got to know where those fuse boxes are so that you can figure out what you're going to have to do to go take care of these problems. Managing the loads, you got a number of active loads that increases. The alternator's got to man up to handle them, but there's a price to pay. The drag placed on the serpentine belt increases as the alternator works harder. Just about everybody knows that. Look for these funky fuses here. There's all kinds of fuses now. There's fuses that don't even have blades. They've just got little contacts on them. I didn't picture those, where you stick down in there. One time I ordered an assortment of fuses from the parts store, and he sent me fuses. There are some that looks like this, but they're really narrow. They've only they've only got one. They look like that right there. And then there's some that look like, just about everybody's seen those. This has got 2 separate filaments in it. If only one of them blows, obviously the whole fuse has got to be replaced, but they've got little terminals on the back where you can check them. These are micro 3 fuses. Take up a little more space than one fuse, but they provide power to 2 circuits. The center prong is the common power supply that feeds the outside prongs. One half of it can blow and leave the other half. Now the smart junction box, which is found in another place, this stuff a computer. Ford's smart junction box was designed by Ford and Lear Corporation. It's in the hub where electrical system wheel has many spokes. I mean, it's just got stuff going everywhere out of that thing. Power windows, door locks, all the lighting, the instrumentation, even the entertainment system, which for years was a standalone system. And so on my Ford pickup is an '07 model F-150, that gray one I've shown you pictures of it here before. It does not have an underhood fuse panel, but it's got a great big fuse panel with a lot of relays. I replaced that thing because it was killing the battery. There was something wrong inside of it. It was killing the battery 4 or 5 years ago. And I've got it out there in the garage. And if I hadn't been such a dum-dum, I would have gone out there and got it off where I got it hanging on the nail, and I would have held it up and shown it to you. But you know what a fuse panel looks like. But anyway, the current smart junction box technology combines fuses, relays, a microcontroller, and all these layers of interconnection into an integrated assembly. And it, got circuit protection. It can shut down loads that draw excessive current in addition to those colorful mini fuses. Now, some of the Chryslers for a very long time have got little circuit protection devices that a lot of people don't even know about. The little thing, it looks like a little capacitor or something. They've got several of these in there. And these things are self-resetting, but they've got no moving parts. It's a little, so if you create a short with it, it will open up, but then when it cools off, it'll close back up. And it's totally electronic. It's just looks like a little tan colored wafer. Matter of fact, in my toolbox out there somewhere, I've got one of those hooked into a jumper wire. As I went to a Chrysler electrical school one time after we got the Jeep franchise, and then Chrysler bought Jeep, and I had to go to their basic electrical school, which is fine because I learn something every time I go to school. But they gave us each one of these little wafers, like what they put in these Chrysler fuse boxes, and they probably put them in other makes fuse boxes too, but Chrysler's the only ones I know that use them. They don't protect all the circuits, but they protect some of them with those, so you never have to replace a fuse. If there's a short, this thing it'll come and go. Anyway, I built me a Fusible Link, a jumper wire, using one of these things for circuit protection. It's really cool the way that thing works. I don't know if you've ever seen one of those or not, but you might see if you take some of these Chrysler, partially disassemble a Chrysler fuse box on some of the ones from back about 20 years ago, you'll find a bunch of these little things in there. You can't change them out. They're actually permanently in there. But they're basically little circuit protectors that I don't even know if they show up in the schematic. But one way or another, this looks very similar to what's under the dash of my truck on the right side, but it's not. This is a smart junction box. And my truck doesn't have a smart junction box on it because it's just a basic truck. Today's smart fuse panels, which are power distribution centers, notice it says scrap if dropped, and the Ford one says if you hold it at 20 centimeters up and you drop it, it says it on the actually it's printed on there like that. If you drop it from 20 centimeters, then you have to put another one on it, and so it can't take being dropped or kicked around or something like that. And if something impacts it wrong way in the vehicle, it has to be replaced for whatever reason too. They contain internal relays, which is annoying and expensive. There's relays built into it. But if you drop it, you bought it. That's the whole point. These relays look like regular relays. This is from a 2010 Camry, but General Motors does this too. There are several of them that do this. General Motors, a lot of your late, like 08, 09, 10, whatever, those, some of the relays that you actually see it in the schematic, if you see it in the schematic, but it doesn't show terminal numbers, that relay is built in. There's a '06 Hyundai Sonata that I had for a trailer vehicle over there, and the power door lock stopped working on it. And so I got to investigating, and it turned out that the internal relays, because the power door locks didn't get used very much, internal relays must have got, the terminals must have got chalky or something. But that little fuse box, we pulled it out. We actually measured resistance while we were energizing the relays, going from pin to pin, and that connector with all those pins in it. And it turned out that those relays inside that box, you can't even get to them in there. They're soldered on the board and all that. Those things were not functioning. They clicked, but they weren't putting enough power out to operate the door locks. And that box, which you'd have to replace all those relays, was $750. I wasn't going to spend that money on a trainer car just to make the door locks work. That's ridiculous. But anyway, a lot of them you'll have to replace on Impalas. I've seen Impalas where you would, or Chevrolet pickups, where the crank relay or one of them would be inside and it would fail, and you'd have to replace the whole fuse panel because of that. All right. Some of the problem with smart junction boxes can be addressed by reflashing it. Some require it to be replaced, which is more common than it should be because it's shock sensitive. You know, if you hit it, reprogramming usually requires a Ford IDS or a compatible scan tool. Some of the common problems is it'll have one or more brake lights stuck on all the time. Battery drains quickly when the car sits for a few days. Of course, that sounds strange, and it quickly when it sits for a few days, that sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Headlights are on bright all the time. Turn signals or parking lights are stuck. Power windows don't work. Instrument cluster malfunctions. Dash lights quit working. On the pickup trucks that came out beginning in '97, the Ford pickups, they had that big junction box under the dash. Sometimes the windshield would leak on that thing and ruin it. And what would happen is if you pull that junction box out, it's not too difficult to do, but the gem module's piggybacked on it. If you pried the end of it open, the insides of that box, and it's astonishing to me they can even make something like this, is a bunch of laminated plates that are stacked with plastic in between them, and basically they have little tabs bent up for, that contact the fuses and all that, or make terminals for the connectors to plug into. It's amazing to me how, I figured one time early on, I'll just take this apart and see if I can find out what's wrong with it. Well, that's the doggone, if you get in there, you got all this, I guess you might be able to take it apart and put it back together. But what we would have on those is all kinds of crazy problems, not because it was a smart junction box, but because water would get in there and compromise and make connections between those layers. So if you pry the end of that box open so you can see those laminated plates, and they're all green and everything and look all chalky like, when electrical stuff looks, then you're going to need to put a junction box. But you got to get the right junction box for the vehicle, just like your gem module. You can't just pop a gem module on there. You better have the right one or it ain't going to work right. Or even the turn signal switch on some of these, the multifunction switch, that 13K359 switch on these Fords. If you put for instance, if you put a 98 model switch on a 99 model vehicle, it won't work right a lot of the time. They're different internally. So they may look alike, they may have a very similar part number, the wires will plug in, they bolt up. But if you got one that you turn on the wipers and they don't work, or some crazy something like that, you just got to make sure you have exactly the right part. Okay, there's a Mustang. This girl came in here one day, she just came walking in. I was by myself in there waiting for students to show up for class. She said, this stoplight is always on my Mustang. And I said, okay, let's go have a look at it. Well, when I went out there and looked at it, I guess Ford was anticipating putting the sequential lights on here. This one didn't have them, but every single one of these segments was being fed by a different wire from the doggone smart junction box, and that's what this one was. And so I told her, I said, why don't we just take the bulb out of this so it won't kill your battery? She said, well, how much would it? I said, you still got these other segments that still work. She said, well, how much would it cost to fix it? And so I made a call, checked it out, and we needed to reflash it and all that kind of hogwash. If I remember his, I said, probably about $450. She said, well, I guess I'll start saving up money for that. And I said, wait a minute, is that one light right there, is that one light worth $450 to you? I mean, really, think about it. If I was driving that Mustang, yeah, I'd like for all the lights to work, but am I going to get off of $450 that I could spend on something else just to make that light work? So you could Scotch lock that thing together with another one of the lights and do the same thing, since she didn't have the sequential lights anyway, Anyway, that was just really crazy. About them Nissan Intelligent Power Distribution Modules, that works on the same function as Ford Smart Junction Box. Now the fuses are serviceable except where certain technical service bulletins let you change the ECM relay or something like that, but that requires a special tool. You're not even supposed to try to remove any of these other relays, although it looks like you can. You know, I mean, whatever you decide to do is up to you. But they don't want you pulling these out of there and putting them back. A lot of the time, like even on GM cars, one of the GM instructors was telling a friend of mine one time, he says, if you unplug the connector and plug it back in 4 times on a GM car, that connector is junk and needs to be replaced, because it can't take a bunch of unplugging and plugging back together. I don't know if that's the reason they don't want you pulling the relays out or not, but it looks like you ought to be able to just grab that with your little relay puller and jerk it out of there, but they don't want you doing that. Now this is the one, a Nissan ECM relay replacement tool. That is a J50389, and basically what you're supposed to do is got a little guide plate and all that, and you hook it up, and it very carefully extracts that thing, and you know, and so on and so forth. But I don't have one of these. I just took a picture of it because I did research on it. Now, the symptoms of a faulty ECM relay in that would be, you know, sputtering, loss of power, warning lights flashing, illuminated mill with no code, start and stall, no start, stalls while driving. That's that relay. You might notice that this ECM relay, instead of having a resistor wired in parallel with that coil, they have a diode in there. And that's a clamping diode, like what you have on an AC collect, so it won't spike the computer, you know, whenever it, you know, releases, because the PCM is actually connected to that, see. And so they don't want a spike running back into the PCM and frying stuff. You know that'll happen. Anyway, that's it right there. Okay, Chrysler's got this totally integrated power module called a TIPM, and it's got serviceable fuses and solid state switching. Usually there's no relays you can change, and one of the things that's so crazy about this is when you pop that cover off, you're expected to find a bunch of relays in there, but there's almost nothing there. Everything's built inside of it. Recent recalls on these are no start ever, start and stall, fuel pumps that run all the time, stalling. So always check your TSBs when you're working on one of those. Now before you start a parasitic draw test, you need to close the doors and lock them with a fob. If the hood's open, make sure you close the latch with a screwdriver, because that's where the switch is on a lot of them. And make sure the hood lamps are out. Move the keys at least 10 feet away from the car. Put them in your toolbox over there somewhere. Make sure any Bluetooth device, such as a smartphone or Bluetooth headset, is not in the vehicle. Wait for a few minutes for the remaining modules to go to sleep. My son does information technology work for a big company, and a headset thing made me think of this. He said that there was a bunch of people having a conference call in a conference room that, you know, he's responsible for all of the IT, which includes the audio and the phones and all that. And he says, we've got terrible audio, and we need to see if you can get us to straighten out our audio on this conference call. We got a bunch of people sitting around the table, and we're talking to another group of people at on another site. And so he went in there, and he said they had a USB headset laying in the middle of the table trying to use it for a conference telephone. Enough said about that. Anyway, before starting a parasitic draw test, work smart. Don't waste time playing 8-ball pool or such nonsense on your phone. I used to tell the students that you can waste time fooling around with your smartphone, or you can make yourself some money. Go work on another job. Use your time wisely. Go to work making the money during the time and return when the job's done. What I have done, just for one example, what I like to do is make sure there's a bunch of different ways you can go about doing parasitic draws. I'm going to show you another couple of them. But this lady one time had this 2010 Mustang, and she was telling me that she wanted to see if it had a parasitic draw, because, you know, there were times when it was spinning slow and wouldn't start and all that. And so I took a little meter, like one of the little cheap meters right there, and put it on amps, and basically connected it between the battery terminal and the, you know, took the terminal off, hooked between the battery terminal and the post that I pulled off of it, so that all the current will be going through there, going through the meter. And so what happened was, it was pulling about, I don't know, 5 or 6 amps, if I remember right, or something like that. But I wasn't satisfied with that. What I did is I just left that meter laying there, and we walked away for a solid hour, and or maybe an hour and a half, I can't remember. We were doing other things in the shop, and when I came back, all of that current had gone away. It didn't have any current draw at all, but it still had a good connection. In a little further testing, I found out that she had a weak battery, and we put a battery in there, and she never had a problem again. On my Explorer, it's an '06 Explorer, it's got a smart junction box. And it does stuff you don't even know about. There's a couple of things that it does that surprised me because I didn't know about them until I experienced it. If you drive too far on that vehicle, and I'm terrible to make a wide turn without remembering to turn my turn signal off. If it doesn't cancel, I'll just drive along with my turn signal on. If you drive far enough, and I don't know how far it is, with that turn signal on, that Explorer will go bing, 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 and you look down and it's telling you, hey, your turn signal's on, doofus. And so there's another thing it did. I actually pulled into the shop there on a really, really rainy day and got out, and it really started coming a monsoon right after I got out, even though it was raining hard. So I looked out there and the lights were on my Explorer. I left them on, and it rained really hard. And I said, I don't want to go fight the rain just to turn off the lights. Besides that, if it rains on my power window switches, who knows what'll happen there. So I'll just wait, until the end of the day, and I'll jump it off if I need to. Well, it quit raining. I forgot to turn off the lights. I walked out there at the end of the day. Oh, crud, the lights are off. That means my battery's dead, and I went to jump it off with the jumper pack. But I got in there, and as soon as I turned on the key, the lights came back on. The smart junction box had turned off those lights after a certain amount of time as a battery saver function. And usually battery saver relay just takes care of the radio and the power windows and stuff like that, or that's your delayed accessory relay. But anyway, your battery saver relay on some of them. Volkswagens used to turn off the headlights when you'd switch off the key and just leave the park lights on. So there's always been a school of thought about that, I guess. Anyway, when I'm saying stuff from memory, sometimes I'll give bad information, so I need to shut up about that. Anyway, common mistakes in Oversight. Having the Toyota Smart Key in or near the car will wake up the modules associated with the entry system and will turn on the lighting in the vehicle. That's why Toyota says make sure the Smart Key is 10 feet from the vehicle. This is also important when you're doing an oil change on some of your hybrids. You don't want to start in the engine because the battery gets a little bit the big battery gets a little too low while you've got the oil drained out of it. If a Bluetooth connected device is connected to the hands-free link on a Honda, the Bluetooth device may continue to have communication with the module. Removing smartphones and Bluetooth devices from the vehicle in the area will eliminate the possibility of keeping the module awake. Now, if the customer's got something like that buried in their glove box, you're going to have an issue with that too. All right, so it's not good to pull fuses without knowing what they feed. Some modules have been disconnected and reconnected to recharge their capacitors and whatnot. So it's wise to know which fuses feed modules, because when you unplug one of them and then reinsert it, you might see a new draw that wasn't there before. Some of them Crown Victorias, it's kind of funny to me, because if you get in the underhood junction box over by the battery and start pulling those little fuses on some of these, because they got that lighting control module, if there's one of the fuses you can pull, it'll chirp the horn. That's really confusing if you hadn't seen it before. If you hadn't, you'll have to take a break, lose time while you wait if the module wakes up. But you need to use a wiring schematic and be careful about that. When voltage and current are flowing and there are connections, you can set your meter on a really, really low setting and do a voltage drop test across the fuse. Some of you might have seen it. My buddy Pete Meyer, he likes to make, he's mentioned this in videos, and a lot of other people are talking about it too. When it comes to finding a parasitic drain, if you see voltage drop, you go from fuse to fuse, and if you see one of those dropping some voltage, current's flowing through it that shouldn't be, especially if everything's turned off and shut down, the door's closed and all that kind of thing. And sometimes you can find a drain or a draw really quickly like that. Now, the small amount of voltage drop is really small, so you'll be measuring millivolts rather than volts. So you're going to get way down to here in this range right here, and not up here, but you're going to go down to these smaller, a measurement under 30 millivolts isn't a problem. The amount of voltage drop may vary depending on the type of fuse in that position. Okay, so circuit breakers and stuff, you can eliminate your non-module feeding fuses before you start on the circuit breakers, and that don't give you access to the inside of the circuit breaker. Occasionally you'll find one where there's a short. There was a police car that came in one time, and they were saying that I guess the power windows weren't working and some other stuff. And so I went looking at that circuit breaker. On those, they had a circuit breaker. And when I reached over to touch that circuit breaker, it just about burnt my finger. And I was like, good grief, this thing's got a dead short somewhere. And I found that under the back seat, there was some wires that were supposed to be connected to the power seats. And that one wasn't equipped because it was a police car, which is no frills in that regard. And some prisoner that wasn't handcuffed had been riding in the back of the police car, and he had somehow got under there and unhooked the wires from the little the little connector shell, and hooked the wires together to try to, I guess he thought he was going to cause the police car to stall or something, I don't know. But that's about blistered my finger when I touched that circuit breaker. It was super hot. But anyway, when I told the cop that that had happened, he goes, "That was that guy that I hauled this morning. I'll go slap that guy." Anyway, this is Albin Moore's trick. The first time I saw anybody talking about this, kind of makes sense when you think about it. But Albin Moore is a guy that writes for Motor Rage like I do. He actually had you shoot this with a forward-looking infrared camera, which I had one of those at the college, one of the $1,000 ones, you know. And if you've got one that's been sitting there for 3 or 4 hours, you know, and you've got a parasitic drain, or if it's been sitting there even for an hour, it's got a parasitic drain on it. When you shoot that box, this is actually an actual photo of this. Of course, the FLIR camera will take a photo and an infrared image, you know, if you got a good one. If you see these hot fuses, then these are suspect. These relays right there, I'm sorry. You got 3 hot relays right there, you got a hot relay there, you got a hot relay there. Now, I'll tell you, we took this shot after the vehicle had been running and we switched it off. But if you've got something, you can get a forward-looking infrared camera attachment to go on your smartphone. I've got one right here. This is a forward-looking infrared camera, and the way that it works is, if I can get it out of here, see that? You plug it into your smartphone. It has to be charged up separately from your phone. Put it on your smartphone. There's a little app you get from FLIR, F-L-I-R, and your smartphone becomes a forward-looking infrared camera. You can buy one of these on Amazon. This is a FLIR 1, and it's for Android, but you can buy one to fit your phone on Amazon, and you can. They got a little code on the end where you can actually shoot that and download the app. But it's pretty darn handy. I've used that thing to find some stuff like that, and so just keep that in mind. It's not a bad idea to have one of those in your toolbox. It costs about $200. That's what I paid for this one here. But you don't have to have one big expensive gun. You can actually, this won't tell you what the temperature is, but you can see what's warm and what's cool and what else do you need, you know, really. You know, think about that. You can use the forward-looking infrared camera to shoot your intake, your exhaust runners and all that kind of stuff if you got think you got a skip and all that. But anyway. Test question from the real world. Complaint that the instrument lamps illuminate when the brake pedal is depressed. Technician A says a wire under the dash near the brake lamp switch is shorted. B says a bad stop or tail lamp bulb is probably the cause. I saw this several times when people were confused about that. And they would say, "What do I need to do about this?" I said, "Pull all the bulbs out of the back." And when you did that, they would find out that one of the bulbs was shorted in here. You know, this is basically how the bulb's wired up the inside. And if it's internally shorted like that, especially if it's a brass one, then that will actually backfeed through the tail light circuit to the dash lights and make you think you got a bigger problem than what you got. Well, that's the end of the video today. That's all I got for you guys, and I just really appreciate you watching, and I appreciate your comments. And some of you guys are really sharp and are really good philosophers, and I hope some of this stuff, you know, helps some more people pass their ASE tests and all, because I always appreciate any kind of help I can get on that front. I'll talk to you guys next week.